Hello and welcome to the Alastair Greener Generationally Speaking podcast, where we look at bridging the generation gap by debunking myths, tackling stereotypes and sharing practical tips on how we can build stronger intergenerational connections. And today I'm joined by someone who aims to redefine politics by implementing a new philosophy of political thinking purposed to remove ideological barriers and unite all central politics in one party through his Nexus Party. Oh, and by the way, he's just 15 years old. Welcome, Keenan Noori.
Thank you very much for having me on.
Well, it's great to see you, and I know that you'll be an inspiration to many just by the fact that you've been able to set up a political party at the age of 15. You know, that's quite a mission to accomplish. But I want to start off by just saying, you know, at 15, how do you view yourself as a member of Gen Z? Would you say you're typical?
I wouldn't say that I'm very typical, no. However, I was watching one of your other earlier podcasts with a chap called Mark Saxby, and he began with asking the very brilliant question of, what is my generation? Do you think, in your opinion?
Great question. But yeah, you're Gen Z, and that means that's anybody. You're younger Gen Z, because it's really from youngsters from 12, 13 at the moment. This is in 2025, up to about the age of 27. And so you're about half and half. Some are in work and some are still in education. The labels that have been attributed to Gen Z have been entitled. They are possibly asking a lot of questions and pushing the limits a little bit by holding older generations to account. They are a very digital generation. You're a digital native. And I think some of the labels are very unkind, and I think they're not, personally, I don't think they're particularly accurate. But I do think that you are a generation that generally you do live with technology. You know, you are a generation who are brought up with social media, with phones as just normal way of life. And likewise, your access to information, but also you are a generation who are very keen to hold others to account, certainly when it comes to politics, when it comes to causes, and when it comes to environmental concerns. So how does that all resonate with you?
It resonates very much with me, and I'd say in terms of Gen Z, obviously looking at the bigger picture, you've said that it ends at age 27, and I'm kind of halfway in there at 15. And judging people when they're in their teens and when they're 15 years old, I think does tend to often mischaracterize them, because we're obviously very young. We're still quite infantile, let's say, even though we're approaching the stage of being adults. But I think judging people when they're 15, I think, doesn't really show the full picture of who they are, and you have to allow them to progress. However, at this current stage, I wouldn't say that I identify much with other 15-year-olds. Obviously, because not many of them have expressed their desire in politics and the same desires and interests as I have. However, some people do, and I very much admire those people, and I do have conversations with them. But overall, I'd say most 15-year-olds do not identify with me, and I don't identify with them, but we still do find common ground.
Okay, so what would you say are the differences, and what's the common ground?
The common ground is that obviously we do spend a lot of time together, and therefore we will kind of be desensitized to one another, so we're used to being around one another. However, obviously one of the differences is me being interested in politics and things that you would normally be exposed to further up afield. For example, most people often ignite their political interest and political knowledge in university when they get involved with university unions and things like that. However, in terms of commonalities, there is also, you've stated that Gen Z like to ask many questions. They're very inquisitive. They like to hold people to account, and I've joined my peers into doing that. For example, we've been very critical of the government in the past for maybe belittling 15-year-olds or children by not allowing them to express their views, which is one of the reasons why I opened up Nexus.
Where do you find that balance? Because you said earlier on about, you are still young, you're still very much forming your own opinions. Some people refer to it as the plasticity of the brain, that the brain is still forming in many ways, and you're still forming your ideas and your thoughts. So where do you get that balance with being able to express your opinions and holding other people to account and saying what you want, yet acknowledging that actually you're not fully formed in many respects?
Well, on the respect that I'm not formed, I actually kind of disagree with that. So I do view myself as having quite fully formed opinions, because if you look at people who are in the upper age bracket of Gen Z, such as the 27-year-olds, I think in terms of political acumen, I'm very much on par with them. So in terms of developing opinions and developing the knowledge, age doesn't really restrict that in many regards. For example, 15-year-olds can be more knowledgeable on stuff such as technology, because we are tech natives, than, for example, people who are 40 or 50, because we've had more exposure to that. So in terms of having opinions, I think it matters more about the actual person and the single individual of where you approach that, not looking at collectively.
And what about obviously life experience is something that you don't have a huge amount of yet. So, I'm guessing you're thinking, well, I make up for it in other ways. What would those ways be?
Those ways are obviously having a very inquisitive nature, which matches all Gen Z. So I obviously started my interest at politics at a very young age, a age which I can't even remember. And taking that interest and not only nurturing it, but also fostering it in an environment where there is knowledge around me and I can access that knowledge very easily thanks to the digital era and thanks that we are tech natives. So I think in terms of offsetting life experience, I've done that by broadening my perspective of life instead of just having a very narrow mindset. So I've exposed myself to different groups of people, different generations, the older generation as well. I've had many conversations with the older generation and their perspective to give me that extra boost and extra head start to life. So I'm more knowledgeable about what life has in offer and what life has in offer for me in the future, for me in particular.
So, Kenan, we're now joined by your father there, and it's great that he's joining us, because I really wanted to get a sense of you growing up. And, Amer, when you saw Kenan growing up and you saw him develop this interest, what was your first thought when you realised that your son was having maybe slightly different thoughts than maybe other children of his age?
Yeah, first I'm surprised, because all the kids, they're going like to games to have like a PlayStation as his twin brother, Xbox. But he, going to like to read the history and politics in iPad and about the old empire and every like kind of historic and politics. Even when he's, 9 years, 10 years, I said, I don't know why he's, interested in that thing, and other like kids as his age, they're going to play in football or going to play in games. Yeah.
And we should say that, you're just a regular family. You live just outside Swindon in Wiltshire. You go to a regular school, Kenan, which I believe is in Wroughton. And, Amer, I understand you came from Jordan.
Yeah.
So when was that, and what was it like setting up family in England?
We came in 2000, mm-hmm. And after that, I have faced twins, boys, in 2002, December 2002. And in 2009, I have Kenan, Yeah, and yes, it's good, to have family here, My rest of family, they live in Iraq and Jordan, yeah.
And, when you first came here, what was the reaction to when, Kenan started showing interest in politics? What were your friends thinking when they heard what he was doing?
all the friends, they like exciting what he doing. I have some relation with doctors in London and Bournemouth. They push him, and my friend also are in Swindon. They support him, and yeah, go up, and everybody is happy here.
Well, Amer, thank you so much for letting us speak to Kenan today.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Really appreciate all of your encouragement. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
So Kenan, it's wonderful that you've got such a supportive family in what you're doing. And when you started thinking about politics, what was the reaction from your friends at the time?
So I'm thankful to be surrounded by quite an intelligent group of friends, and some of them even have expressed political views, and that means I can engage with like-minded peers of my own age, which really helped me foster my development in terms of political acumen. And that also develops a very positive environment around me, which enables me to carry on with politics, as I have people who are like-minded with me to push me on and engage normally with my development and engage normally with my party, because they see it as second nature.
Well, exactly. I mean, it does sound very second nature. You don't seem fazed by anything whatsoever. You're very, very clear on what you stand for. And we're going to talk a little bit about your policies in a while. But the first thing I want to do is just understand your relationship with older people. You mentioned and hinted earlier on about the reactions sometimes that you might get from older people who wonder really, well, what have you got to say as a 15-year-old? So first of all, what is the reaction you get from older people? And then secondly, how do you then deal with that?
So first of all, I have to state first and foremost that the vast majority of the older people have expressed a very positive reaction, and especially obviously friends of my dad, as he stated, expressed a very positive reaction. But there was obviously a very small minority which aims to cause trouble, and as my news coverage has expanded, obviously more people have had their opinions on my party, and some of the older generations have said, who is he to comment on the situation of the state? He's only 15, hasn't seen life. He's barely taking his GCSEs. So on that front, people have also come to defend me from the older generation, and a lot of my friends have also swiftly come to the defense of my party. But the vast majority of older generations do express support for new ideas from the younger generation, because they also see that nurturing the next generation of politics and politicians is very vital to ensuring that the country is stable. And I've also had a very small minority, but a minority nevertheless, and an organisation nevertheless, of old people joining the party and being part of the follower base. There is section of old people who have joined and expressed familiarity with my ideas and my political agenda.
Now, one of the stereotypes that goes around about Generation Z is that they don't have much resilience. I would say that you clearly defy that stereotype. But what would you say, A, in terms of your own resilience, and to people who say that Gen Z don't have resilience?
To people who say that Gen Z don't have resilience, those are people who are not part of Gen Z and people who do not interact with Gen Z often, and that's just a fact. Because if you have interacted with Gen Z, such as me, you know that we are capable of doing many things, and I'm an anecdote of that. We've established a political party, a political movement, which has gained traction in media and with bases not just in the UK, but also in terms of Europe, internationally. People have expressed support. And it's unified people into having their say in terms of the democratic process and our political system. And teachers as well, their job is to bridge the gap between generations. So they're a very knowledgeable group of people and sector in this regard. And they will tell you that children are inquisitive, children do engage with others, and children are very open-minded and on the whole extroverted as well to other people and to new ideas. So I find that argument raised by some people who attack our generation is completely ill-founded.
Okay, I love your strong feelings. This is good. Good political stuff. And just before I ask you about your policies, and I'm going to give you an opportunity to do a sort of like a 1 or 2 minute party political broadcast. So have that in the back of your mind in a moment. But another thing that we know is different is the way that younger generations communicate. They communicate differently. They favour different platforms to older generations. So how do you reach older generations who might not be using the same platforms as you, or are you not using those younger generation platforms?
So in terms of younger generation platforms, I do maintain a limited social media presence. For example, I have Instagram social media for my party, and obviously that sort of interaction on the internet, including the website. However, one interaction which I didn't fully appreciate going into was TikTok, because there was a news story on TikTok which covered my party, which reached around 750,000 views, and all my friends were bombarding me to request, get TikTok, you'll be famous. But I just didn't want to enter that environment. And on that part, I think maybe I have limited my interaction with the younger generation. In terms of the older generation, however, I do interact with them face to face, normally not just using platforms online. However, when that isn't necessarily available, I do tend to use social media. And there is some divide between our capabilities of using social media and how we can use it. However, we've managed to bridge that divide, as I like talking to older people as I talk with young people. There is absolutely no patronizing effect that I have. So to develop our knowledge of using social media to interact with each other. And I have talked with many older people, not just in my family, but also friends of my dad, to establish communication.
Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it? When it comes to communication, these days you have to use multiple platforms if you're going to reach people, because it's a more the message is harder to get out there these days because there are so many different methods by which you can do it. So one method to get your message out there is through podcasts like this. So I'm going to give you your opportunity now to give me your sort of 1 or 2 minute manifesto on the Nexus Party. So when it comes to the next election, assuming I've got a candidate standing in my area, why should I vote for them?
Sorry, could you just repeat that last bit of audio, since the audio did cut out, unfortunately?
So why should I vote for anybody in the Nexus Party, assuming they're standing in my local area? Convince me in a 1 or 2 minute election broadcast why I should vote for Nexus.
So the majority of politics, as we know it now, is based on pure ideology. There's only one stance. And the notion that one size fits all, or one ideology fits all problems in politics, is absolutely absurd. As we've seen, different governments with different ideology have tackled problems. For example, you look at the new Labour government and you look at the One Nation Conservatives of the past and the Clement Attlee government, featuring different ideologies such as left-wing socialism and right-wing conservatism, or centre-right conservatism, issuing more deregulation and privatisation. We've seen that both of those have been successful. So the notion that one size fits all in politics, as we've seen with parties such as the Conservatives, such as Reform UK, who only embrace one ideology in one section of the political spectrum, that's clearly false. As we've seen throughout history, different parties with different ideas and different ideologies can adapt to scenarios. And we've seen, in terms of the electorate, the reason why no party stays in power forever is because they don't match the situation forever. The situation does change. For example, if the situation is in need for public investment, right-wing parties are more wary of introducing more public investment. They want to issue savings such as the austerity savings of David Cameron, whereas left-wing parties do issue more favourable agreements towards public investments and investing more and borrowing more to invest into public services such as the NHS, such as the health service. So Nexus tends to bridge that gap by getting the best of policy from all across the spectrum, looking at what worked in the past, such as with One Nation Conservatism, with Edward Heath and Macmillan, into a fusion of all political policy of across the spectrum, whether it be centrist, whether it be centre-left, whether it be centre-right, whilst also pushing out the extreme ideologies which are based on more or less emotion, more or less hatred of certain groups, such as the far right or such as the far left, which have seen little to no empirical evidence of their ideologies working. So we do realise that there has to be a fusion of ideas, a fusion of the electorate, a fusion of politicians to work together to see what the situation is and to push out all bias of ideology and to push out the notion that one size fits all when it clearly doesn't and the evidence shows that it doesn't, and to fuse them all based on where the state is, whether there needs to be an increase in privatisation, an increase in business support, or whether there has to be an increase in public support and public investment. We've managed to hit all of those areas. For example, we issue a grant rollout to small, medium-sized businesses and small businesses in our manifesto. However, we've also pushed for more public interaction, more government interference within housing. We've issued a £100 billion housing initiative to make sure that the next generation and also home buyers have the opportunity to own a house. And we also push for more radical redistribution of wealth, whilst it also being controlled and measured, and make sure that everybody has what they need and has the opportunities that they have, whilst also supporting lower income people through stuff like welfare and public services. We've planned a £10 billion investment into polyclinics, adding a new section to the NHS, which will help lots of people and also alleviate the stress of our health workers, which would decrease around half of the outpatient cases in hospitals by facilitating new infrastructure and also giving incentives for the next generation to advance in areas such as medicine and to make that more attractive.
I think I've just about heard your entire manifesto there. That was brilliant in a couple of minutes. Just extraordinary. And congratulations for, coming up with these quite specific policies. And you are able to articulate it so well. Where did you develop that skill? How did you develop that skill? Because I think most people would probably agree there are a few 15-year-olds who are able to speak quite as eloquently as you.
So being in politics, politicians need to have a good public interaction, they need to have good PR, they need to engage well with communications. And having surrounded myself with media interactions, I've studied media interviews with politicians. You tend to naturalize yourself with them and you tend to know how to interact with the media, which I have also developed with my own interaction with the media, because obviously we've had quite a lot of news coverage, which I'm very thankful for. However, I've also kind of chucked myself into the arena by going to marches, going to political debates, going to political activities, whether I like it or not, because eventually, whilst it may be uncomfortable at first, you need to get used to the fact that you have to be a good communicator to get your ideas out there. Otherwise, it will just die like many other political parties have in the past, and I don't intend to go away under the sofa of history, if you like.
I don't think you're going away anywhere anytime soon. So what's the trajectory for you, Kenan? What's next? You said you're about to do your GCSEs, and no doubt politics will be very much a part of that, and also going into your A-levels. What's the future hold for you?
The future holds for me medicine, hopefully, to study medicine, whilst also having politics as an activity that I can actively engage in. Because one of the things that I've noticed, if you look at successful politicians, they haven't all studied PP, which is politics, philosophy and economics at university. They haven't studied politics. When you look at, for example, Che Guevara, who was a Cuban politician, maybe not the accurate route to go down because he was a Marxist. However, nevertheless, he was a politician, a very successful one. So you don't have to study politics to be involved in politics, and that's what I've embraced and seen throughout the next generation of politics, certainly as 15-year-olds. A lot of us don't actively study politics officially within A-levels or within university. However, we can still have opinions and you can still engage in open debate with experts who have studied, and also be yourself an expert by embracing the new technology which we have and embracing the internet to access resources by universities, accessing universities by accessing material institutions which have researched politics, and research it yourself and have a first-hand account of politics yourself, rather than just studying politics. Because if you look at politicians, most people have the critique of, well, they're just too out of touch. They don't know my problems. They don't know how to have a mortgage. They don't know how to own a house because they've been privileged. They've been entitled to everything they have. They've gone to private schools, many of them have. Whereas if you do study medicine and do come up the hard way, as it's now known, through the middle class and through the working class, that makes you more relatable as a politician. I think that's very, very important in this day and age where it's more about communication and less about policy, which is, I think, one of the negatives of the current political environment, because we've seen members such as Nigel Farage, who I won't talk about that much, but he's very much engaged in the communication aspect rather than policy aspect, because he goes to the pub, he acts like a very nice individual, he interacts with the people, but obviously you dive down, then that's a whole other topic for another time, but I don't necessarily agree with them. But in terms of communication, I think that's very much a part of politics, whether we like it or not. And we have to play by the rules of politics, whether we like them or not. And one of that rule is communication.
And you're absolutely right. And clearly my interest is in communication, but more specifically communication between generations. So just finally wrapping up here, Kenan, the big thing we know about politics is that it's not engaging young people, as it should do, because they are the next generation, not just of people in business and in everything that we do, but also in terms of politicians. What would you do if it was you were asked on, say, Question Time about engaging different generations? How would you, as a manifesto pledge, how would you bridge the generation gap when it comes to communication?
So first of all, I have to make an overarching statement. Policies are not made within 5 minutes of an interview. They are made over long periods of time. However, I will give you a brief insight into that, and hopefully a policy in the making for the next manifesto. And that is to obviously interact normally. Just interact normally. Do not belittle them. Do not interact normally of how you do with peers of your generation, because that does come off as patronizing to members of my generations. And I have witnessed people become disenfranchised with politics because politicians have interacted differently or belittled them or patronized them in some manner. And a good example of that would be New Labour or One Nation Labour in 2015, if I remember correctly. They targeted young women of back then it was the millennials, who were the youngest generation, with and it was young ladies who they were targeting because they were very disenfranchised with the Conservative campaign, with a baby pink van to target the young generation, which is obviously very patronizing, because this fills the arena with a bunch of stereotypes that ladies love pink and they're just little girls, which is obviously not correct, and that was proven to not be correct after the results of the 2015 election were announced, because Labour had their rears handed to them in the polite term. So in terms of engaging the next generation into politics and my generation into politics, it's to really push for organisations such as the youth sections of parties. We've seen Young Labour, or the young branch of the Conservatives, really push those into having their voices heard in Parliament. And obviously there's been a momentum around the movement of giving 16-year-olds the right to vote and lowering the minimum voting age. And that's obviously one area where you can make people of this generation interact in policy making and policy engagement. On another of social issues that also interact with the generation of Gen Z. For example, education issues, because we are in the education system and a lot of the people in Gen Z have their opinions on how to improve the education system. So speaking with them, not only on all issues, which I think is important to educate them, but on issues that matter to them, such as education, not necessarily macroeconomic, such as inflation or productivity. Maybe move away from that area of politics, but engage with them on social grounds, engage with them on cultural grounds, which has seen a very big resurgence in politics, and engage with them in terms of their educational needs and in terms of their development, entering into college and entering into universities.
Wow, what a great answer. Kenan, you have got an absolute wonderful future ahead of you, both as a politician, and I wish you all the best with your medical career as well. A very interesting combination. Thank you to you and to your father, Amer, for coming on the podcast as well. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. And if people want to find out more about Nexus, how do they do it?
You can visit our Nexus website, which is nexusparty.com, or just type in Nexus Party in the search bar and it should come up as first result. We also have an Instagram page up and running at Party Nexus, so feel free to follow that and become engaged, and please do cite your opinions. And
maybe even TikTok in the future.
Maybe TikTok in the future. Currently not currently, but maybe in the future I will open up to that arena.
Kenan, thank you so much. You've given us a brilliant insight into Gen Z and also your views on politics and the future. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much. And thank you very much indeed for listening to another podcast here at Generationally Speaking. We're back every 2 weeks, so we'll see you soon. Bye for now. The Alastair Greener Generationally Speaking podcast was presented by me, Alastair Greener. It was recorded at Granary Studios and produced by James Jones. Please follow us and leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts. To find out more, visit generationallyspeaking.co.uk.